Bilionario was going on honeymoon with his fiancée until he saw his ex at the airport with a baby. Welcome to Secrets Narrated. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. When the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10 and share what you felt along the way. And if you enjoy emotional stories filled with twists and hidden truths, make sure to follow Secrets Narrated so you don't miss the next one. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy every detail. Elliot Vance moved through the pristine marble corridors of Logan International Airport with the calculated precision of a man who owned everything but felt nothing. At 46, his tall, athletic frame commanded attention, broad shoulders that spoke of disciplined morning workouts, sharp jawline framing ice-blue eyes that had closed billion-dollar deals without flinching. His dark hair, perfectly styled with just a hint of silver at the temples, caught the artificial lighting as he walked. The charcoal Tom Ford suit fit him like it was crafted for his body alone, and it had been. "The jet is ready whenever you are, Mr. Vance." His assistant's voice crackled through his earpiece, but Elliot barely registered the words. His mind was elsewhere, cycling through quarterly projections and environmental sustainability metrics that would reshape the tech industry. Everything was numbers, data, strategic moves. Everything except the hollow feeling that had been growing in his chest for months. Beside him, Camille Rhodes glided with the effortless grace of someone born into high society. At 38, she was stunning in the way that magazine covers demanded. Platinum blonde hair swept into an elegant chignon, emerald eyes that sparkled with practiced charm, and a figure that made her cream-colored Chanel dress look like haute couture advertising. She was everything a billionaire's wife should be: intelligent, sophisticated, connected to the right families, and completely aware of her role in this carefully orchestrated life. "Tuscany in October," she said, adjusting the diamond bracelet on her wrist. "I can already picture us at the vineyard. The photography will be perfect for the society pages." Her voice carried the musical quality of someone educated at Swiss finishing schools, but Elliot noticed how she spoke about their honeymoon like a marketing campaign. He nodded absently, checking his Patek Philippe watch, a wedding gift from his father, along with the merger that had necessitated this marriage. The Vance-Rhodes union wasn't just romantic. It was a strategic alliance that would secure both families' environmental tech empires for the next generation. Clean energy, carbon capture, sustainable manufacturing. Their combined patents would revolutionize how the world fought climate change, and all it cost was his heart. "Mr. Vance," Camille's voice sharpened slightly. "You're not listening." She was right. His attention had drifted to the departure board, scanning flight information he didn't need. "I was saying that my mother wants to know about the Christmas gala. She's already coordinating with the event planners." "Of course," Elliot replied, the words automatic. "Whatever she thinks is best." It was always whatever someone else thought was best. His father's business decisions, the board's strategic partnerships, his mother's social obligations, and now Camille's family traditions. His life had become a series of other people's choices, each one logical and profitable and completely empty. That's when he saw her. She was sitting near gate C12, completely absorbed in reading something on her tablet while balancing a toddler on her lap. The little girl couldn't have been more than 2, with dark curls that caught the airport lighting and curious brown eyes that surveyed everything around her with fearless interest. But it was the woman holding her that made Elliot's world tilt off its axis. Naomi. Even from 30 feet away, he would have recognized the graceful curve of her neck, the way she tucked her auburn hair behind her left ear when she was concentrating, the quiet strength in her posture. At 34, she looked exactly as he remembered, perhaps more beautiful if that was possible. Her skin had a warm, golden undertone that spoke of mixed heritage, and she carried herself with the confident elegance of a woman who had found her place in the world. She wore a simple navy dress that emphasized her natural beauty rather than competing with it. The child in her arms had the same dark hair, the same intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything. She was playing with what looked like a small stuffed elephant, making it dance while Naomi smiled and occasionally glanced down to engage with her quiet games. Elliot's feet stopped moving entirely. His chest felt like someone had reached inside and squeezed his heart with an iron fist. 3 years. 3 years since she'd walked out of his life, and he'd convinced himself he was over her. He'd built an empire, closed deals worth hundreds of millions, and found a perfect wife who fit into his world like a custom-made puzzle piece. But seeing Naomi with a child, A child who looked to be about 2.5 years old, made everything else disappear. Elliot? Camille's voice seemed to come from very far away. What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. He couldn't answer. His mind was doing rapid calculations that had nothing to do with business. 3 years since Naomi had left. 2.5 years old. The timeline was impossible to ignore, impossible to rationalize away. I need a moment, he managed, his voice rougher than he'd intended. I'll be right back. Elliot, our boarding starts in 20 minutes, Camille called after him, but he was already walking away, drawn across the terminal by a force stronger than logic or propriety, or the careful plans that governed his entire life. Each step toward gate C12 felt like stepping backward through time. He remembered the last fight they'd had. Not really a fight, but a quiet, devastating conversation where Naomi had told him she couldn't be with someone who kept secrets. He'd tried to explain about the family obligations, the business pressures, the arranged engagement that had been hanging over his head since childhood like a sword waiting to fall. But she'd already found the documents, had already seen the marriage contract with Camille's family, dated and signed 2 years before he'd even met Naomi, had already realized that their entire relationship had been built on a lie of omission. You never planned to choose me, she'd said, her voice steady and heartbroken. You just didn't tell me I wasn't really an option. Now, watching her gently wipe something from the little girl's cheek, Elliot realized what he'd lost. It wasn't just Naomi. It was the life they might have built together, the family they might have been, the man he might have become if he'd had the courage to fight for what he wanted instead of what was expected. The little girl looked up as he approached, her dark eyes meeting his with curious boldness. For a heart-stopping moment, Elliot saw something familiar in her face, the shape of her chin, the way her eyebrows arched when she was thinking. Naomi followed her daughter's gaze and froze. Her tablet slipped slightly in her hands, but she caught it gracefully, never letting go of the child. For several seconds, they simply stared at each other across 3 years of silence and a lifetime of what-ifs. Hello, Elliot, she said finally, her voice carrying the same calm strength he remembered. No surprise, no anger, just acknowledgement, as if she'd been expecting this moment and had already made her peace with it. Naomi, his voice came out as barely more than a whisper. His eyes dropped to the little girl, who was studying him with the fearless curiosity that belonged to children who had been loved well. She's beautiful. Her name is Isabella. We call her Bella. Naomi's hand moved protectively to stroke the child's hair. She's 2.5. The confirmation hit him like a physical blow. He'd been doing the math, but hearing it confirmed made everything real. 2.5 years old. Conceived right before Naomi had left him. Naomi, he started, but she shook her head gently. Not here, she said quietly. Not now. Bella had dropped her elephant and was reaching toward Elliot with the trusting openness of a child who didn't understand that the world was complicated. Without thinking, he reached back, letting her tiny fingers wrap around his index finger. Her grip was surprisingly strong. Elliot, Camille's voice cut through the moment like a blade. There you are. They've started boarding. She approached with the clicking of designer heels on polished floor, her expression shifting from relief to confusion as she took in the scene. Naomi sitting with a child, Elliot crouched beside them, the obvious tension crackling in the air. Oh, Camille said, her social training kicking in automatically. I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were speaking with someone. Elliot straightened slowly, Bella's fingers still wrapped around his. Camille, this is Naomi. Naomi, this is Camille. The introduction hung in the air, incomplete and loaded with everything he couldn't say. Naomi's eyes moved to Camille's left hand, taking in the massive diamond engagement ring, the matching wedding band, the obvious wealth and status. Her expression didn't change, but Elliot saw something flicker in her eyes. Not hurt exactly, but a kind of resigned understanding. Congratulations, Naomi said simply, and somehow made it sound sincere. I hope you'll be very happy. Bella tugged on Elliot's finger, bringing his attention back to her. She was holding up her elephant, offering it to him with the generous spirit of someone who didn't yet know that not everyone deserved her gifts. Thank you, sweetheart, he said softly, accepting the small toy. He's very special. Elliot, Camille's voice had taken on a sharp edge. We really need to go. He looked up at Naomi, desperate to say something that would matter, that would bridge the impossible gap between this moment and all the choices that had led them here. But what was there to say? That he was sorry? That he'd thought about her every day for 3 years? That seeing her with Bella made him question everything he thought he wanted from his life? Take care of yourself, was all he managed. You too, she replied, gathering Bella more securely in her arms. Have a wonderful trip. As he walked away, following Camille toward their gate, Elliot heard Bella's voice behind him, clear and musical and achingly familiar. Bye-bye, man. Bye-bye. He didn't turn around. He couldn't, because if he did, he might never get on that plane. He might throw away everything he'd built, everything his family expected, everything that made sense on paper. But as they reached their gate, as Camille handed over their boarding passes with practiced efficiency, as the flight attendant welcomed them aboard with professional smiles, Elliot's mind kept circling back to one devastating question. What if everything he thought he wanted was just everything he'd been told to want? The private jet's leather seats had been designed for comfort, but Elliot felt like he was sitting on broken glass. Every nerve in his body was on high alert, every thought spiraling back to gate C12, to dark curls and tiny fingers, to the way Naomi had said, 2.5, with such quiet certainty. Camille settled into the seat across from him, already pulling out her tablet to review their itinerary. The villa has been completely renovated, she said, scrolling through photos. The wine cellar alone cost $300,000. Perfect for the lifestyle magazine spread they want to do. Elliot nodded mechanically, but his mind was calculating different numbers. Bella's age, the timeline of his breakup with Naomi, the month they'd spent in his Hamptons house before everything fell apart, the night before she'd found those documents, when they talked about having children someday, when she'd fallen asleep in his arms, whispering about the future they'd build together. Are you even listening to me? Camille's voice cut through his thoughts like ice. He looked up, meeting her emerald eyes. She was beautiful, objectively, undeniably beautiful, the kind of woman who looked perfect on his arm at charity galas, who knew exactly which fork to use at state dinners, who could discuss environmental policy with world leaders and make it sound effortless. She was everything his family had wanted for him, but she wasn't Naomi. I'm sorry, he said. My mind is on the Shanghai deal. Camille's expression softened slightly. You work too hard. That's why this honeymoon is so important. We need time to actually get to know each other without boardrooms and contracts and your father's constant interference. The irony wasn't lost on him. Their entire relationship was a contract, negotiated by lawyers and sealed with prenuptials that read more like merger agreements. They dated for exactly 18 months, the appropriate courtship period according to both families' advisors. They'd attended the right events, been photographed at the right parties, announced their engagement in the society pages with all the fanfare of a corporate acquisition, and through it all, Elliot had told himself it was enough. That compatibility mattered more than passion, that building an empire together was more valuable than the messy unpredictability of love. Camille, he said slowly, what do you want from this marriage? She looked surprised by the question. What do I want? I want what we've always talked about. The environmental initiatives, the philanthropic projects, the influence we can have together. I want to build something meaningful. But what do you want? He pressed. Not the families, not the business objectives. What do you want? A flicker of something. Uncertainty, vulnerability, crossed her face. I want to matter, she said quietly. I want to be more than just another society wife whose biggest accomplishment is organizing charity luncheons. With our resources combined, we can actually change how the world approaches climate change. It was a good answer, an honest answer, and it made Elliot realize how much he'd underestimated her. Camille wasn't just playing a role, she genuinely believed in their mission together, which somehow made everything worse. The woman at the airport, Camille said suddenly. Who was she? Elliot's chest tightened. Someone I used to know. Someone you used to love. It wasn't a question. Camille had always been perceptive, trained from childhood to read social dynamics and unspoken tensions. She sat back in her seat, studying him with the analytical mind that made her such a formidable negotiator. The child looked to be about 2, she continued. Dark hair like yours, similar bone structure. Elliot felt the walls closing in. Camille, is she yours? The question hung in the air between them like a bomb waiting to explode. Elliot looked out the window at the clouds passing below, thinking about how simple everything had seemed just 6 hours ago. He'd been a billionaire heading to his honeymoon with his perfect wife, his life mapped out in quarterly reports and 5-year plans. Now he was a man who might have a daughter he'd never known existed. I don't know, he said finally. But the timing fits. Camille was quiet for a long moment, processing this information with the same methodical approach she used for everything else. Did you know about her when we got married? No. The answer came immediately because that much was true. I had no idea. But you suspect now? Yes. Another long silence. When Camille spoke again, her voice was carefully controlled. What are you going to do about it? It was the question he'd been asking himself since the moment Bella's tiny fingers had wrapped around his. What was he going to do? Ignore it? Pretend he'd never seen them? Continue on with his honeymoon and his perfectly planned life? Or turn the plane around and demand answers that might destroy everything he'd built? I don't know, he admitted. Camille reached across the aisle and touched his hand. Her fingers were cool and steady, exactly like everything else about her. Elliot, I need you to understand something. I didn't marry you for love. We both know that. I married you because I believed we could build something important together. But I won't be married to a man who's in love with someone else. The honesty in her voice was startling. In all their months of courtship, they'd never spoken this directly about the nature of their relationship. If that child is yours, she continued, if you still have feelings for her mother, then we need to address it now, before we go any further. Elliot stared at their joined hands, his tanned and calloused from years of sailing and rock climbing, hers pale and perfectly manicured. They looked good together on paper. Their genetics would produce beautiful children. Their combined wealth would fund research that could save the planet. But there was no electricity in her touch. No warmth beyond friendship and mutual respect. What are you saying? I'm saying that if you need to go back, we go back. I'd rather know the truth now than spend the next 20 years wondering if you're thinking about someone else every time you look at me. The offer was generous. More generous than he deserved from a woman he'd essentially married for business reasons. But it also terrified him, because it meant making a choice he'd spent 3 years avoiding. And if I do go back? He asked. If everything changes? Then we'll figure it out. Quietly, discreetly, with as little scandal as possible. But Elliot, she squeezed his hand. You need to understand that I won't wait forever. If you choose to pursue this, you're choosing to give up what we could have built together. The weight of the decision settled on his shoulders like a lead blanket. On one side was everything he'd worked for. Stability, respect, a partnership that made sense to everyone who mattered. On the other was a woman who'd left him, a child who might not even be his, and the kind of messy emotional chaos he'd been avoiding his entire adult life. How long do I have to decide? We're landing in Florence in 8 hours, Camille said practically. If we're turning around, we need to do it before then. 8 hours. 8 hours to decide whether to continue living the life he'd planned or take a leap into complete uncertainty. Elliot closed his eyes and tried to imagine the next 20 years. Board meetings and charity galas and perfectly orchestrated public appearances. Children who would be raised by nannies and educated at the finest schools. A wife who respected him and shared his values but would never look at him the way Naomi had, like he was her whole world. It was a good life, a meaningful life. But was it his life? There's something else you should know, Camille said quietly, about why our families arranged this marriage. Elliot opened his eyes. What do you mean? The Shanghai deal you've been working on? The carbon capture technology that's supposed to revolutionize renewable energy? It only works if our patents are combined. Neither family has the complete solution alone. The revelation hit him like ice water. You're saying this marriage was about technology transfer? I'm saying our marriage gives both families access to research that's worth billions. Without it, your environmental division fails. Without it, my family's clean energy initiatives collapse. Elliot felt something cold settle in his chest. How long have you known? Since the beginning. I thought you knew too. So even his noble mission to save the planet was built on a foundation of arranged convenience. Every choice he'd made, every sacrifice he'd justified, every time he'd told himself he was doing something bigger than personal happiness, it had all been orchestrated by people who valued profit over everything else. Jesus, he breathed. I'm telling you this because you deserve to know what you're really choosing, Camille said. If you walk away from this marriage, you're not just walking away from me. You're walking away from the chance to implement technology that could help reverse climate change. Millions of people could be affected by that decision. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, announcing their current altitude and flight path. They were halfway to Italy, halfway to a life that would benefit millions but leave him empty inside. Elliot thought about Bella's laugh, bright and musical in the sterile airport terminal. He thought about the way Naomi had looked at him, not with anger or resentment, but with the quiet strength of someone who'd made peace with being abandoned. He thought about the man he'd been before family obligations and business strategies had taken over his life. The man who'd taken weekend trips to small coastal towns just to watch Naomi sketch in her notebook, who'd spent hours talking about books and dreams and the kind of future that couldn't be quantified in spreadsheets. "Camille," he said slowly, "do you think it's possible to love someone and still be wrong for them?" She considered the question seriously. "I think it's possible to love someone and still not be able to give them what they need." "What if what they needed was just honesty?" "Then I'd say you have your answer." The plane continued its eastward trajectory, carrying them toward a future that seemed increasingly surreal with every passing mile. In a few hours, they'd be in Tuscany, touring vineyards and posing for photographs that would appear in magazines around the world. They'd be the golden couple, the perfect merger of love and ambition. But somewhere over the Atlantic, Elliot Vance began to understand the difference between the life he'd been told to want and the life he actually needed. And for the first time in 3 years, he wasn't sure which one he was brave enough to choose. The villa in Tuscany was everything the magazines had promised. Rolling hills dotted with olive groves stretched toward the horizon, painted in the golden light of late afternoon. The infinity pool reflected the medieval towers of nearby San Gimignano, and their suite overlooked vineyards that had been producing wine since the Renaissance. It should have been perfect. Instead, Elliot stood on the terrace, his phone heavy in his hand, staring at a number he'd memorized but never called. Naomi's contact information had been deleted from his devices 3 years ago, but some things couldn't be erased so easily. "The photographer will be here in an hour," Camille said from behind him. She'd changed into a flowing white dress that caught the Mediterranean breeze, looking every inch the honeymoon bride for their planned magazine shoot. "They want to capture the golden hour light." Elliot didn't turn around. "I've been thinking about what you said on the plane. About the technology transfer. About all of it." He finally faced her, noting how the sunset light softened her features, made her look younger and more vulnerable than usual. "Camille, we're about to spend the rest of our lives together based on a lie." "What lie?" "That this is what either of us actually wants." She walked to the stone railing beside him, her heels clicking on the terracotta tiles. "I told you what I want. The environmental work. The chance to make a real difference." "No," Elliot interrupted. "That's what you think you're supposed to want. Just like I thought I was supposed to want stability and a perfect strategic partnership. But when did we stop asking ourselves what would actually make us happy?" Camille was quiet for a long moment, looking out over the vineyards. "I stopped asking that question when I was 12, she said finally, "when my parents explained that girls like me don't get to choose happiness over duty." The honesty in her voice caught him off guard. In all their months together, she'd never spoken about her childhood, her real feelings about the expectations placed on her. "What did you want to be when you were 12? He asked. A smile ghosted across her lips. "A marine biologist. I wanted to study coral reefs and find ways to save them from bleaching. I used to spend hours reading about ocean ecosystems, dreaming about diving in the Great Barrier Reef. What happened to that dream? My mother enrolled me in finishing school instead. Said marine biology wasn't an appropriate career for someone who would need to represent the family interests." Camille's voice was matter-of-fact, but Elliot heard the old hurt underneath. "Funny thing is, I'm still trying to save the environment. Just from boardrooms instead of underwater." Elliot felt a pang of recognition. How many dreams had been sacrificed on the altar of family expectations? How many versions of themselves had they both abandoned to become the people their parents needed them to be? "What about you?" Camille asked. "What did 12-year-old Elliot want to be?" He almost laughed. "A park ranger. I wanted to live in a cabin in Yellowstone and protect wildlife from poachers. I had this whole fantasy about hiking through forests every day, sleeping under the stars." "When did you stop wanting that?" "When my father had his first heart attack. I was 15. Suddenly the family business wasn't just about money. It was about keeping him alive long enough to see his legacy secured." Elliot ran a hand through his hair. "Except now I wonder if I was protecting his dream or killing my own." They stood in comfortable silence, two people who'd spent their lives performing roles they'd never auditioned for. The photographer would arrive soon, ready to capture images of marital bliss for public consumption. Tomorrow there would be interviews, social events, the carefully choreographed dance of being a power couple. But tonight, for just a moment, they were simply two people who'd forgotten how to want things for themselves. "Elliot," Camille said softly, "I need to tell you something else." He turned to face her fully. "I've been having an affair." The words hit him like a physical blow, not because they hurt, but because of how little they hurt. He should have been angry, betrayed, devastated. Instead, all he felt was a strange kind of relief. How long? He asked. 2 years, since before our engagement. Camille's hands gripped the stone railing. Her name is Dr. Alexandra Reyes. She's a marine biologist. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. She's working on coral restoration projects in the Caribbean, Camille continued. Everything I dreamed about doing when I was 12. And she sees me as more than just a Rhodes family daughter. Do you love her? Yes. The admission came out as barely more than a whisper. God help me, yes. I love her so much it terrifies me. Elliot stared at his wife, this woman he'd married 12 hours ago who was confessing to an affair that somehow felt like the most honest thing either of them had shared in months. Why are you telling me this? Because on the plane, you asked what I wanted, and what I want is to wake up next to someone who makes me feel alive instead of just appropriate. Camille turned to face him, tears threatening to spill. I want to support Alexandra's research. I want to dive with her in coral reefs and feel like I'm making a difference with my hands instead of my checkbook. But your family's business will survive without me. My brother can handle the environmental division. He's actually better at it than I ever was. She wiped at her eyes carefully, preserving her makeup for the photos that might not happen. I've been a coward, Elliot. I've been so afraid of disappointing everyone that I forgot about disappointing myself. Elliot felt something shift in his chest, like puzzle pieces finally clicking into place. So we're both in love with someone else. We're both in love with the people we were supposed to be. The phone in Elliot's hand buzzed with a text from the photographer, confirming their arrival time. In 40 minutes, they'd be expected to smile and pose, and pretend they were the happiest couple in the world. What do we do now? He asked. Camille smiled then, the first genuinely happy expression he'd seen from her all day. I think we call our lawyers. The prenup protects both our assets equally. I helped write it, remember? She looked out over the Tuscan countryside one last time. Besides, I have a feeling our families will be more concerned about the technology patents than the marriage itself. Elliot pulled out his phone again, this time scrolling to his father's contact. They're going to be furious. Probably. But you know what? I'm tired of living my life to manage other people's emotions. Camille gathered her white dress and headed toward the villa. I'm going to call Alexandra and tell her I'm coming home. Camille? Elliot called after her. For what it's worth, I think she's lucky to have you. For what it's worth, she replied. I hope your daughter has your eyes. After she disappeared inside, Elliot stood alone on the terrace as the sun finished its descent behind the hills. The golden hour was ending, taking with it the perfect lighting for wedding photos they would never take. He dialed the number he'd memorized but never used. It went straight to voicemail. Hi, you've reached Naomi. I can't come to the phone right now, but leave a message and I'll get back to you. Her voice was exactly as he remembered, warm, slightly husky, with the hint of laughter always lurking underneath. For a moment, he couldn't speak. Naomi, it's Elliot. I know this is unexpected, but I need to talk to you about Bella, about us, about the truth I should have told you 3 years ago. He paused, watching the last light fade from the sky. I'm coming home. I don't know what that means or what you'll say, but I'm coming home. He hung up and immediately dialed another number. Thompson Aviation? This is Elliot Vance. I need you to prepare my jet for immediate departure back to Boston. As he waited for the confirmation, Elliot thought about 12-year-old boys who wanted to save forests and 12-year-old girls who dreamed of saving coral reefs. He thought about the long chain of compromises and expectations that had led two good people to marry each other while loving someone else entirely. But mostly he thought about dark curls and tiny fingers, and a woman who'd been brave enough to walk away when staying would have been easier. For the first time in 20 years, Elliot Vance was about to do something purely because it felt right, not because it made sense. The photographer arrived just as his car was pulling away, leaving behind a villa full of wedding presents and a marriage that had lasted exactly 14 hours. But as the Tuscan hills disappeared behind him, Elliot felt lighter than he had in years. The familiar streets of Cambridge looked different at dawn. Elliot hadn't slept during the 8-hour flight back to Boston, his mind cycling through scenarios and conversations he'd practiced, but would never use. Now, driving his Aston Martin through the quiet neighborhood where Naomi lived, he felt like he was moving through a dream. He'd found her address through channels he probably shouldn't have used. His security team's resources were extensive, and tracking down Dr. O. Naomi Keller, currently an art therapy specialist at Boston Children's Hospital, had taken less than an hour. She lived in a renovated Victorian house on a tree-lined street where professors and young families walked dogs and jogged with expensive strollers. It was exactly the kind of neighborhood she would have chosen. Intellectual without being pretentious, family-oriented without being suburban. A place where a single mother could raise a daughter surrounded by books and art, and the quiet confidence that came from academic achievement. Elliot parked across the street from number 47 and turned off the engine. The house was painted a warm gray with white trim, flower boxes filled with late-season mums decorating the windows. A child's bicycle with training wheels sat on the front porch next to a small table covered with art supplies, crayons and colored paper scattered like confetti in the morning light. His heart clenched at the sight of those training wheels. The front door opened, and Naomi emerged carrying a travel mug in one hand and a leather satchel in the other. She wore dark jeans and a rust-colored sweater that complemented her auburn hair, which was pulled back in a low ponytail. Even from 50 feet away, she looked exactly as he remembered, graceful, purposeful, completely comfortable in her own skin. Behind her, a small figure appeared in the doorway. Bella, dressed in what looked like a miniature version of her mother's outfit, complete with a tiny backpack decorated with elephants. She was taller than Elliot had realized at the airport, more solid and independent looking, but those dark curls and intelligent eyes were unmistakable. Naomi crouched down to Bella's level, adjusting the child's jacket and saying something that made the little girl giggle. The sound carried across the quiet street like music, and Elliot felt something break open in his chest. A silver Honda Accord pulled up to the curb, and an elderly woman got out. Naomi's mother. Elliot recognized her immediately, though her hair was grayer now, and she moved with the careful precision of someone managing arthritis. Margaret Keller had never liked him, had seen right through his polished charm to the entitled rich boy underneath. She'd been right, of course. "Gamma!" Bella shouted, running down the front steps with the fearless enthusiasm unique to toddlers who trusted the world completely. Margaret swept the little girl into her arms, spinning her around despite her obvious joint pain. "Good morning, my sunshine. Are you ready for your adventure today?" Naomi approached more slowly, kissing her mother's cheek before transferring Bella's backpack and a lunchbox. "Her swimming lesson is at 10, she said, and don't let her convince you that ice cream counts as breakfast again." "That was one time," Margaret protested, settling Bella into the car seat she'd obviously installed in preparation. "And it was frozen yogurt, with chocolate chips and gummy bears," Naomi replied, but she was smiling. Elliot watched this domestic ballet with fascination and growing dread. This was Naomi's life, organized, loving, complete without him. She had her work at the hospital, her mother's support, a daughter who clearly adored her. What right did he have to disrupt that stability with questions about paternity and abandoned feelings? The Honda pulled away with Bella waving enthusiastically from her car seat, and Naomi stood alone on the sidewalk checking something on her phone. She looked tired, Elliot realized. There were shadows under her eyes that hadn't been there 3 years ago, and a tension in her shoulders that spoke of long days and longer nights. Before he could lose his courage, Elliot got out of his car. The click of the door closing seemed unnaturally loud in the morning quiet. Naomi looked up from her phone, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Across the narrow street, 3 years of silence stretched between them like a chasm. "Hello, Naomi," he said finally. "Elliot." Her voice was steady, unsurprised. "I got your message. I wasn't sure you'd listen to it. I almost deleted it without listening." She slipped her phone into her jacket pocket, but curiosity won. He crossed the street slowly, giving her time to object or retreat. But Naomi held her ground, watching him approach with the same calm assessment she'd shown at the airport. When he stopped a few feet away, close enough to see the gold flecks in her brown eyes, she tilted her head slightly. "You look terrible," she observed. "When was the last time you slept?" "I've been on a plane, just got back from Italy." "Your honeymoon." It wasn't a question. "My very brief honeymoon." Elliot ran a hand through his hair, suddenly aware of how disheveled he must look. "Camille and we had a conversation about what we actually wanted from our lives. And, turns out we were both in love with other people." Something flickered in Naomi's expression. Not hope exactly, but perhaps the ghost of curiosity. "That must have been an interesting conversation." It was surprisingly liberating. He gestured toward her house. Would you be willing to talk? Really talk?" Naomi checked her watch. "I have to be at work in an hour. Then we have an hour." She studied his face for a long moment, and Elliot forced himself to remain still under her scrutiny. Whatever she was looking for, Sincerity, desperation, the truth he'd been too cowardly to share 3 years ago. He hoped she could find it. "Coffee," she said finally, "but not inside. There's a cafe 2 blocks from here." The walk to Morning Glory Cafe was conducted in silence, but it wasn't the uncomfortable tension Elliot had expected. Instead, it felt like the quiet before an important exam, charged with potential but not yet committed to any particular outcome. The cafe was exactly the kind of place Naomi would love. Exposed brick walls covered with local artwork, mismatched furniture that somehow worked perfectly together, and the rich smell of coffee beans roasted on site. They ordered black coffee for him, oat milk latte for her, and found a corner table away from the handful of early morning customers. "So," Naomi said, wrapping her hands around her mug, "you want to talk about Bella? I want to talk about everything, but yes, Bella is part of it. What exactly do you want to know?" The directness of the question caught him off guard. He'd expected evasion, anger, demands for explanations about his own behavior. Instead, Naomi was offering clarity with the same straightforward honesty that had made him fall in love with her in the first place. "Is she mine?" "Yes." The simple word hit him like lightning. No hesitation, no equivocation, just truth delivered with surgical precision. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you made your choice." Naomi's voice remained calm, but her grip on the coffee mug tightened. "When I found those documents, when I realized you'd been engaged to someone else the entire time we were together, I understood that whatever we had was never going to be enough for you to fight for." "That's not," Elliot started, then stopped. Because it was true, wasn't it? When forced to choose between family expectations and Naomi, he'd chosen the path of least resistance. "You're right. I was a coward. You were 28 years old and terrified of disappointing your father." "That's not an excuse." "No," Naomi agreed. "It's not, but it's an explanation." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 3 years' worth of unspoken truths settling between them. "When did you find out you were pregnant?" Elliot asked. 6 weeks after I left, I thought about calling you." She smiled ruefully. "I actually dialed your number probably 50 times. But every time I was about to press send, I'd remember that marriage contract and realize that telling you would just complicate your life without changing anything fundamental. It would have changed everything." "Would it? Really?" Naomi leaned forward slightly. "Because from where I sat, you'd already made your choice. And I wasn't going to force you to pretend to want a life you'd never actually chosen." The accusation was delivered gently, but it still cut deep because of its accuracy. Would he have left Camille for Naomi and a baby? Would he have been strong enough to face his father's disappointment, the family's financial consequences, the disruption to carefully laid plans? He wanted to say yes, but honesty compelled him to admit he didn't know. "I've thought about you every day for 3 years, he said instead. "I know." Naomi's smile was sad but not bitter. "I could feel it sometimes. The weight of your regret. How is she? Bella? What's she like?" For the first time since they'd sat down, Naomi's expression softened completely. "She's brilliant, curious about everything, fearless in the way that scares me daily. She loves elephants and swimming and books with lots of pictures. She asks approximately 3,000 questions per day." Does she ask about her father?" "Not yet. She's still too young to really understand family structures beyond what she knows. But she will, eventually." "What will you tell her?" Naomi was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee as if it contained answers to questions she'd been avoiding. "I don't know," she admitted. "I always thought I'd figure that out when the time came. But seeing you yesterday, it complicated things." "How?" "Because she looks so much like you, and because the way you looked at her." Naomi stopped, then started again. "You looked at her like you were already in love." Elliot felt his throat tighten. "I was. I am. The moment I saw her, I felt this recognition, like I'd been waiting my whole life to meet her. That's what I was afraid of." "Why afraid?" Naomi met his eyes directly. "Because falling in love with your daughter is easy, Elliot. Being her father, day in and day out through tantrums and illnesses and all the ordinary moments that don't feel magical, that's the hard part. And I won't let you break her heart the way you broke mine." The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, charged with everything Naomi hadn't said. Elliot stared into his black coffee, seeing his own reflection distorted in the dark surface. 3 years of wondering, and now he knew. He was a father. But knowing and being were 2 entirely different things. "I deserve that," he said finally. "The accusation about breaking hearts. I wasn't trying to hurt you. Naomi's voice was gentler now, professional almost. But I need you to understand what's at stake here. Bella's world is stable, she feels safe. If you're going to be part of her life, it can't be temporary. What would convince you that I'm serious? Time, consistency, proof that you've changed from the man who chose obligation over love. Elliot looked up to find her studying him with the analytical gaze he remembered from when she was working on a particularly challenging art piece. She'd always been able to see through surface presentations to the truth underneath. "What if I told you I quit my job this morning?" he said. Naomi's eyebrows rose slightly. "Did you?" "Called my father from the plane. Told him I was resigning from the board, stepping down as CEO, selling my shares back to the company." The memory of that conversation still made his chest tight. "He hung up on me." "Why would you do that?" "Because you were right 3 years ago. I was living someone else's life, making choices based on what other people expected rather than what I actually wanted." Elliot leaned forward. "The man who chose that arranged marriage, he doesn't exist anymore. People don't change that dramatically overnight, Elliot." "Maybe not, but they can start." He pulled his phone from his pocket, showed her the screen. "I've been looking at properties since I got your voicemail. Small towns in New England where I could open a consulting practice, help small environmental companies develop sustainable technology, places where a little girl could ride her bike safely and know all her neighbors." Naomi's expression softened slightly, but she didn't speak. "I know it sounds crazy," Elliot continued, "throwing away everything I've built for a woman who has every reason not to trust me, and a daughter who doesn't even know I exist. But for the first time in my adult life, crazy feels like the only sane choice." The cafe door chimed as new customers entered, bringing with them the scent of approaching rain. Outside, the morning light had taken on that peculiar gray quality that preceded New England storms. "There's something else you should know," Naomi said quietly, "about Bella's birth." Elliot's attention snapped back to her completely. She was premature, born at 32 weeks. Naomi's hands tightened around her mug. "She spent 6 weeks in the NICU, touch and go for the first 2 weeks. The words hit him like a physical blow. While he'd been attending board meetings and planning his strategic engagement to Camille, his daughter had been fighting for her life in a hospital room. "My mother was with me," Naomi continued, "but there were nights when I thought I might lose her and I felt so alone. I kept thinking that you should know, that you should be there even if we weren't together anymore." "Why didn't you call?" "Because I saw the announcement. Your engagement to Camille was all over the society pages that month. Professional photos, interviews about your perfect partnership. It was clear you'd moved on." Elliot remembered those photos. Camille radiant in her designer gown, him smiling with practiced charm, both of them playing their roles to perfection. At the time, he'd told himself he was being responsible, mature, forward-thinking. Now he realized he'd been a fool. "I would have come," he said hoarsely, "if I'd known." "Would you? Really? Or would you have sent your assistant with a lawyer to work out custody arrangements?" The question hung in the air, unanswerable because they both knew it might have been true. The Elliot of 3 years ago might have chosen the path that minimized public disruption over the path that honored emotional truth. "I can't change what I would have done then," he said, "but I can choose what I do now." Naomi glanced at her watch, and Elliot realized their hour was almost up. Soon she'd go to work, helping children process trauma through art, and he'd be left alone with the weight of everything he'd missed. "Come with me," she said suddenly. "What?" "To my work. I want you to see something." Boston Children's Hospital buzzed with the controlled chaos that Elliot remembered from the few charity events he'd attended there. But following Naomi through the corridors felt different now, less like obligation, more like pilgrimage. The pediatric art therapy wing was located on the 3rd floor, painted in soft colors that somehow managed to feel both cheerful and calming. Naomi's office was smaller than Elliot had expected, with child-sized tables and chairs, walls covered in drawings and shelves lined with art supplies organized with almost military precision. "This is where I spend most of my time," she said, settling behind her desk, "working with kids who've experienced trauma, helping them process emotions they don't have words for." Elliot examined the artwork covering the walls, pictures drawn by small hands in crayon and marker and paint. Some were bright and hopeful, others darker, more complex. All of them pulsed with raw emotion. That one was drawn by a 7-year-old whose father left when her mother was diagnosed with cancer, Naomi said, pointing to a picture of a house with all the windows colored black. "And that one is by a boy who was in a car accident that killed his sister." The second picture showed two stick figures holding hands, one with wings. "What you do," Elliot said slowly. "It matters. It does. And it's taught me something important about men who abandon their responsibilities." Naomi's voice was steady, but her meaning was clear. The damage doesn't just affect the adults. It shapes how children see themselves, their worth, their ability to trust. "Is that why you really didn't call? Because you were protecting Bella from becoming one of these kids?" "Partly." Naomi stood, moving to a filing cabinet. "But also because I was protecting myself. I couldn't risk hoping you'd choose us only to have you choose obligation again." She pulled out a folder and handed it to him. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, chronicling Bella's life from birth to present day, tiny and fragile in the NICU, covered in tubes and monitors, taking her first steps in what looked like Naomi's living room, blowing out candles on a rainbow-colored cake, playing in a sandbox, chocolate ice cream smeared across her face. "She's beautiful," Elliot whispered, studying each image. "She looks like you when she's concentrating. Gets this little crease between her eyebrows." Thunder rumbled outside, and rain began pattering against the windows. Naomi glanced at her computer screen, checking her schedule. "I have a session in 10 minutes, she said. "A 5-year-old whose parents are getting divorced. She hasn't spoken since they told her about the separation. What will you do?" "Start with Clay. Sometimes children can shape their feelings before they can voice them." Naomi took the folder back, her fingers brushing his briefly. "Elliot, if you're serious about wanting to be part of Bella's life, you need to understand that it's not about grand gestures or dramatic changes. It's about showing up, consistently, even when it's inconvenient or uncomfortable. What would that look like? Start small. Maybe we could meet for coffee once a week. Let Bella get used to seeing you around without pressure or expectations. If you can prove you're reliable, we can talk about more." It wasn't what he'd hoped for, not the immediate reconciliation his heart craved, but it was more than he'd dared expect. "Once a week," he repeated. "For how long?" "As long as it takes for me to trust that you won't disappear again." A knock on the door interrupted them. A young nurse peeked in, smiling apologetically. "Dr. Keller, Sarah's here for her appointment." "Send her in," Naomi said, then turned back to Elliot. "I have to work now." "Of course." He stood, pausing at the door. "Naomi, thank you for giving me a chance. I'm not doing it for you," she said quietly. "I'm doing it for Bella. Every child deserves the chance to know their father, if that father is willing to earn the privilege." As Elliot left the hospital, rain soaking through his expensive suit, he thought about privilege versus right. For 3 years, he'd assumed his biological connection to Bella gave him certain claims. Now he understood that being a father was something to be earned, not inherited. His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. "Board meeting moved to 2 p.m. They want to discuss your resignation." Elliot deleted the message without responding. That life, those obligations, belonged to someone he used to be. Instead, he opened his browser and searched for apartments in Cambridge, close enough to Bella's school for weekly coffee dates, small enough for a man learning to live deliberately, instead of strategically. For the first time in his adult life, Elliot Vance was planning a future based on love instead of logic, and it terrified him almost as much as it thrilled him. 3 weeks later, Elliot sat in the same corner table at Morning Glory Cafe, checking his watch for the 4th time in 2 minutes. 10:47 a.m. Naomi was 17 minutes late, and she was never late. Their Tuesday meetings had become sacred to him, the one constant in a life he was systematically dismantling and rebuilding from scratch. The barista, a college student named Marcus who'd grown accustomed to their weekly routine, caught his eye and shrugged sympathetically. "Want me to keep her latte warm?" "Please." Elliot forced a smile, but anxiety gnawed at his chest. What if she'd changed her mind? What if Bella had asked questions Naomi wasn't ready to answer? The door chimed, and Naomi rushed in, her usually composed demeanor slightly frazzled. Her hair was escaping from its ponytail, and there was what looked like finger paint on her sweater. "I'm so sorry," she said, sliding into the chair across from him. "Bella had a meltdown this morning about her elephant being in the wrong position on her bookshelf, and then my mother's car wouldn't start and—" She stopped, taking a breath. "I'm sorry. I know you probably have other things to do." "Actually, I don't." Elliot signaled Marcus for her usual order. "This is the only appointment I keep anymore." It was true. Over the past 3 weeks, he'd methodically extracted himself from his former life. Board meetings became conference calls, became polite declinations. The penthouse apartment was on the market. His assistant had been relocated to work for his cousin at the London office, and most of his belongings were in storage while he figured out what kind of life he actually wanted. "How is the apartment hunting going?" Naomi asked, settling into her chair. "I think I found something. A 2-bedroom in Porter Square, walking distance to the elementary school Bella will probably attend." He pulled out his phone, showing her photos. "It has a small garden where she could plant things if she wanted to, and the 2nd bedroom could be, if she ever wanted to stay over." Eventually, Naomi studied the pictures, and Elliot held his breath. They hadn't discussed overnight visits, hadn't discussed much beyond these careful weekly conversations where they circled around the larger questions of how to build a relationship between a father and daughter who were strangers to each other. "It looks perfect for you," she said finally. "Very different from the penthouse. That was never really mine anyway. Just another thing I thought I was supposed to want." Marcus appeared with Naomi's latte, and Elliot noticed she looked tired. The shadows under her eyes were more pronounced this week. "Is everything okay? You seem stressed? Work has been intense lately. We're seeing more kids dealing with family disruptions. Divorce rates always spike after the holidays." She wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "And Bella's been asking questions." Elliot's heart jumped. "What kind of questions?" "About fathers. Apparently her friend Sophie at daycare has a daddy who takes her to the zoo every Saturday. Bella wanted to know why she doesn't have a daddy." "What did you tell her?" "The truth in age-appropriate language, that some families look different from others, that she has a mommy and a grandma who love her very much." Naomi met his eyes. "But she's smart, Elliot. She's starting to notice that other kids have fathers and she doesn't." "Maybe," Elliot started, then stopped himself. He'd learned over the past weeks that pushing too hard only made Naomi retreat. "What do you think she needs to know?" "I think she needs to know that her father exists and wants to meet her. But I also think she needs to understand that relationships take time to build." Naomi leaned forward slightly. "I've been thinking about your consistency these past few weeks. You've shown up every Tuesday even when I was running late or had to reschedule. That matters." "Does it matter enough?" Naomi was quiet for a long moment, studying his face the way she used to when she was deciding whether to trust him with something important. "There's a children's art exhibit at the Museum of Fine Arts this Saturday," she said finally. "Interactive installations designed for kids Bella's age. I was planning to take her, if you wanted to join us, as a friend who's interested in meeting her properly." Elliot felt his throat tighten with emotion. After 3 weeks of careful conversations and cautious hope, this felt like stepping across a threshold. "I'd like that very much." "There are rules," Naomi said quickly. "We don't mention the word father or daddy. You're just Elliot, someone Mommy knows who wanted to meet her. If she asks questions, I handle them. If she gets overwhelmed or upset, I take her home immediately." "Of course." "And Elliot?" Naomi's voice softened. "She might not warm up to you right away. She's cautious around new people, especially men. Don't take it personally if she hides behind me or doesn't want to talk. I understand." He paused, then added, "What should I know about her, to help the meeting go well?" For the first time in weeks, Naomi's smile was genuinely warm. "She loves when people take her seriously. Don't talk down to her or use baby voice. She has strong opinions about everything. Which socks to wear, what to eat for breakfast, whether elephants or giraffes are better animals. What's her position on the elephant versus giraffe debate? Elephants, obviously. They're smarter and have better memories." Naomi's laugh was like music. She also loves stories. If you can tell her a story about anything, why leaves change color, how airplanes stay in the sky, where the moon goes during the day, you'll have her complete attention. Elliot found himself smiling. "I can work with that." They talked for another hour, Naomi sharing small details about Bella's personality and preferences. Her favorite book, a story about a mouse who wanted to be a librarian. Her biggest fear, vacuum cleaners. Her most impressive skill, she could count to 50 and was working on reading simple words. "She sounds incredible," Elliot said as they prepared to leave. "She is. She's also a 2-year-old, which means she can go from delightful to destructive in about 30 seconds. Naomi gathered her purse and jacket. "Just remember that whatever happens on Saturday, it's not about you. It's about helping her feel safe and comfortable." As they walked outside together, Elliot realized this was the longest conversation they'd had that wasn't entirely focused on logistics and boundaries. For brief moments, it had felt like the easy companionship they'd shared 3 years ago. "Naomi," he said, as they reached the corner where they usually parted ways, "can I ask you something personal?" She tensed slightly but nodded. Do you ever think about us? About what might have been different if I'd been honest from the beginning? She was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. I used to, she said finally. Especially during those first few months after Bella was born, when I was exhausted and overwhelmed and wanted someone to share the load with. She looked up at him. But I've learned that what if is a dangerous game. It keeps you from appreciating what is. And what is a little girl who deserves to know her father if he's willing to be a real father. What is two adults who cared about each other once and are trying to figure out how to be good co-parents. She paused. What is not a second chance at romance, Elliot. I need you to understand that. The words hit him like cold water, but he nodded. I understand. Do you? Because Saturday isn't about winning me back. It's about meeting your daughter, and if you can't separate those two things, I can, he said quickly. I will. This is about Bella. Naomi studied his face one more time, then nodded. Saturday at 10. Meet us at the museum entrance on Huntington Avenue. As she walked away, Elliot stood on the corner watching until she disappeared around the bend. 3 weeks of Tuesday conversations had led to this, the chance to meet his daughter properly, to begin building whatever relationship might be possible. He pulled out his phone and deleted 3 work-related emails without reading them. Then he spent the rest of the afternoon in the children's section of the Harvard bookstore, researching the best stories to tell a curious 2-year-old who loved elephants and wanted to understand how the world worked. For the first time in his adult life, preparing for a meeting felt more important than any business deal he'd ever made. Saturday couldn't come fast enough. Elliot arrived at the Museum of Fine Arts 20 minutes early, clutching a children's book about elephants and fighting the kind of nerves he hadn't experienced since his first board presentation. He'd changed clothes 3 times that morning, finally settling on dark jeans and a navy sweater, casual enough not to intimidate a toddler, but nice enough to show respect for the occasion. The October morning was crisp and bright, with families already gathering near the museum entrance. He watched fathers lifting children onto their shoulders, mothers pushing strollers, and felt the sharp pang of everything he'd missed. 2.5 years of firsts, first steps, first words, first everything, that belonged to someone else's memories now. You look nervous. He turned to find Naomi approaching with Bella in tow, and his heart nearly stopped. In person, without the distance of the airport or the distraction of adult conversation, his daughter was even more beautiful than he'd remembered. She wore purple leggings and a sweater decorated with dancing elephants. Her dark curls caught in 2 small ponytails that bounced as she walked. Her eyes, his eyes, surveyed everything with fearless curiosity. I am nervous, Elliot admitted to Naomi, then crouched down to Bella's level. You must be Bella. I'm Elliot. Bella studied him with the intense scrutiny unique to small children, then pressed closer to Naomi's leg. Mama, why is the man so tall? Some people are taller than others, Naomi said gently, just like some people have curly hair, and some have straight hair. His hair is like mine, Bella observed, reaching up to touch one of her ponytails. But not curly. That's right. You have beautiful curls. Elliot pulled the book from behind his back. I brought you something. Your mama told me you like elephants. Bella's eyes widened as she took in the colorful cover showing a baby elephant learning to paint with its trunk. Elephants can paint? This story says they can. Would you like me to read it to you? She looked up at Naomi for permission, received a nod, then stepped slightly closer to Elliot. Okay, but I already know lots about elephants. I bet you do. What's the most important thing to know about elephants? They never forget, Bella said solemnly, and they love their families very much. The innocence of the statement hit Elliot like a physical blow. That's exactly right. As they entered the museum, Bella's shyness evaporated in the face of wonder. The children's exhibit was a playground of interactive art. Walls where kids could create their own masterpieces, sculptures designed for climbing, and digital installations that responded to movement with cascades of color and sound. Look, Mama. Bella ran toward a station where children could make virtual paintings by dancing in front of a screen. I'm making rainbows. Elliot watched, mesmerized, as she jumped and spun, laughing as digital colors bloomed in response to her movements. Every gesture was pure joy, uninhibited and infectious. Other parents smiled watching her, drawn to her obvious delight. She's not usually this outgoing, Naomi said quietly, standing beside him. New places make her cautious. What's different today? You, I think. You're not trying too hard. With children, authenticity matters more than effort. At the next station, Bella discovered a sandbox filled with kinetic sand where she could build and rebuild sculptures. She immediately began constructing what appeared to be a zoo, complete with separate areas for different animals. "This is where the elephants live," she announced, patting down a section of sand. "They need lots of space because they're big and they like to walk around with their families." "That makes sense," Elliot said, settling cross-legged beside her. "What do elephants eat?" "Peanuts," Bella giggled, "and grass and leaves and lots of water. They use their trunks like we use our hands." "Can you show me how?" Bella stood up and demonstrated, swinging her arm like a trunk to pick up a small sand toy. "Like this, but elephants are much stronger. They can pick up big logs." "Wow, you really do know a lot about elephants." "I have 3 stuffed elephants at home," Bella said proudly. "Little gray, medium gray, and big gray. I'm not very good at names yet." Elliot laughed, a genuine, delighted sound that made both Naomi and Bella look at him with surprise. "Those are excellent names, very logical. Mama says logic is important. She uses it at work to help sad kids feel better. Your mama is very smart." "I know." Bella returned to her sand construction, then looked up at him seriously. "Are you sad?" The question caught him completely off guard. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Naomi tense, ready to intervene if needed. "Sometimes," Elliot said honestly. "Why do you ask? You look sad. Like the kids Mama helps." Bella tilted her head, studying his face. "But also happy. Sad happy is confusing." "You're right. I am sad happy. Sad because I missed meeting you for a long time, and happy because I'm meeting you now." "Why did you miss meeting me?" Elliot felt the weight of Naomi's attention, the careful boundary they'd established around this exact question. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes," he said carefully, "and it takes time to fix them." Bella nodded, as if this made perfect sense to her. "Mama says mistakes are okay if you learn from them. Your mama's very wise." "I know that too." She returned to her sand sculpture, humming tunelessly while she worked. "Do you want to help me build the elephant house?" For the next hour, Elliot found himself completely absorbed in the serious business of sand architecture under Bella's direction. She was a demanding but patient supervisor, explaining the specific requirements for different animal habitats while creating increasingly elaborate structures. "The lions need a cave," she instructed, "but the elephants need open space and a water place for swimming." "Like a pool?" "Exactly, but bigger than our bathtub." Naomi, who had been watching from a nearby bench, approached as they were putting finishing touches on what Bella had declared to be the world's best zoo. "We should probably start heading home soon," she said gently. "Grandma is making lunch." "Can Elliot come to lunch?" Bella asked, the question so natural and innocent that both adults froze. "Oh, sweetie," Naomi said carefully. "Elliot probably has other plans." "Actually," Elliot interrupted, "I don't have any plans, but I understand if lunch is family time." Bella looked between them with the shrewd assessment of a child who sensed adult complications she didn't understand. "Is Elliot not allowed at family lunch?" Naomi glanced at Elliot, some unspoken communication passing between them. He could see her weighing options, considering implications, trying to balance Bella's innocent invitation against the careful boundaries they'd established. "Grandma always makes too much food," Bella continued, apparently unaware of the tension, "and I want to show him my elephants." "If it's okay with your mama," Elliot said gently, "I'd love to meet little gray, medium gray, and big gray." Naomi was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Lunch? But my mother will ask questions." "I can handle questions. These will be pointed questions, from a woman who's watched me raise her granddaughter alone for 2.5 years. "I understand." As they prepared to leave the museum, Bella slipped her small hand into Elliot's with the casual trust that children reserved for people they'd decided were safe. The gesture was so natural, so right, that he had to blink back sudden tears. "Did you like my zoo?" she asked as they walked toward the exit. "It was the best zoo I've ever seen. When we come back, we can make it even bigger. Maybe with giraffes too." "When we come back?" Elliot glanced at Naomi, who was watching their joined hands with an unreadable expression. "If you want to," Bella said matter-of-factly. "Building zoos is more fun with helpers." Outside, as Naomi called for an Uber, Bella tugged on Elliot's hand to get his attention. "Elliot?" "Yes? Are you going to be my friend?" The question was so simple, so hopeful, that it broke his heart and healed it simultaneously. "I would love to be your friend, Bella. If that's what you want." "Good," she said with satisfaction. Friends help each other build zoos and read elephant stories. And friends don't leave without saying goodbye. The last part was said with the particular emphasis children used when stating important rules, and Elliot realized this might be her way of processing the absence of a father in her life. Friends stayed. Friends said goodbye properly. Friends could be counted on. "I promise," he said solemnly. "I will always say goodbye. And hello again. And hello again." Bella beamed at him, then ran to Naomi to report this important development. As Elliot watched his daughter explain their friendship agreement to her mother, he understood that he'd been given something far more valuable than paternal rights or legal custody. He'd been given the chance to earn his place in her life, one sandbox zoo at a time. Margaret Keller stood in the doorway of her daughter's house like a sentry, her silver hair pulled back in a practical bun, and her sharp blue eyes fixed on Elliot with unmistakable suspicion. At 72, she carried herself with the ramrod posture of a retired high school principal who had never met a problem she couldn't solve or a student she couldn't see through. "So," she said without preamble, "you're him." "Gamma!" Bella rushed past Elliot and launched herself into Margaret's arms. "We built the best zoo ever, and Elliot knows about elephants, and he's going to read me a story." Margaret's expression softened instantly as she caught her granddaughter, but her eyes remained fixed on Elliot over Bella's head. "Is that so? Well, I suppose we should invite this elephant expert inside before Mrs. Patterson next door calls the police about loitering." The house's interior was exactly what Elliot had expected, warm and lived in, with built-in bookshelves, family photographs covering every surface, and the lingering scent of something delicious simmering in the kitchen. Bella's artwork was displayed prominently on the refrigerator, and toys were scattered across the living room in the organized chaos that spoke of a child who was encouraged to be creative, but taught to clean up after herself. "Lunch will be ready in 20 minutes, Margaret announced, hanging up their coats. "Bella, why don't you show Mr. Vance your room while your mother and I finish preparations?" It was clearly a dismissal designed to give the adults time to talk, but Bella grabbed Elliot's hand eagerly. "Come see my elephants and my books and my fish." Bella's room was a wonderland of carefully curated childhood magic. The walls were painted pale yellow with hand-drawn murals of animals, and low bookshelves held everything from picture books to beginner chapter books organized by color. A small desk sat by the window with art supplies neatly arranged, and in the corner a fish tank bubbled quietly. "This is Bubbles," Bella said, pressing her face to the glass. "He's a betta fish, and Mama says he's very smart for a fish." "He's beautiful," Elliot said, admiring the fish's brilliant blue fins. "How long have you had him?" "Since my birthday. I'm 3 now, but I was 2 when we got him." Bella moved to her bed where 3 gray stuffed elephants sat in a row from smallest to largest. "These are my elephants. Want to meet them?" For the next 15 minutes, Elliot was formally introduced to Little Gray, Medium Gray, and Big Gray, each with their own personality quirks and favorite activities according to Bella. Little Gray liked to hide under pillows. Medium Gray was the best at hugs, and Big Gray was the leader who made sure everyone was safe at night. "Big Gray used to be scared of the dark," Bella confided, but Mama explained that darkness is just nighttime wearing a blanket, and now he's not scared anymore. "That's very wise of your Mama. She knows lots of things. She says when I'm older, I can help kids who are scared too." The casual statement revealed so much about how Naomi was raising her daughter, with honesty, emotional intelligence, and the understanding that even small children could be empathetic and helpful. It was exactly the kind of parenting philosophy Elliot would have wanted for his child, if he'd ever thought seriously about having children. "Bella, lunch," Margaret's voice carried from downstairs. The dining room table was set for 4, with Bella's booster seat placed strategically between Naomi and Margaret. Lunch was homemade chicken soup, grilled cheese sandwiches cut into triangles, and apple slices arranged with the precision of someone who understood that presentation mattered to children. "This is delicious, Mrs. Keller," Elliot said after his first spoonful of soup. "Thank you for including me." "I didn't have much choice," Margaret replied tartly. "When Bella invites someone, we honor her invitation. But that doesn't mean I have to pretend this isn't complicated." "Gamma," Naomi warned quietly. "No, it's fine," Elliot said. "Mrs. Keller has every right to be protective." "Do I? Because from where I sit, you're a stranger who abandoned my daughter when she needed you most and now wants to waltz back into their lives because it's convenient." Margaret's tone was conversational, but her words cut like surgical instruments. Bella, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension, was focused on dipping her sandwich into her soup with scientific precision. "Look, Gamma," The cheese gets stretchy when it's warm. Very clever, sweetheart. Margaret's voice gentled automatically when addressing Bella, then hardened again as she turned back to Elliot. Tell me, Mr. Vance, what happens when you get bored with playing father? When the novelty wears off and you remember you have a business empire to run? I resigned from my company, Elliot said quietly. 3 weeks ago. Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly. Convenient timing. Necessary timing. I can't be the father Bella deserves while living a life that was never actually mine. And what kind of father do you think Bella deserves? It was a test, clearly. Margaret was probing to see if he'd offer platitudes or if he'd thought seriously about what parenting actually meant. She deserves someone who shows up, Elliot said, watching Bella carefully construct a sandwich soup combination. Someone who listens to her stories about elephants and takes her seriously when she's scared. Someone who learns her routines and respects her relationship with the people who've loved her since birth. He turned to meet Margaret's sharp gaze. She deserves someone who understands that being her father is a privilege I have to earn, not a right I can claim. Pretty words, Margaret said, but her tone had lost some of its edge. What do they mean in practice? They mean I'm moving to Cambridge to be close enough for regular visits. They mean I'm available when she needs me, not just when it's convenient for me. They mean I respect Naomi's rules, and your relationship with Bella. Elliot knows about elephant families, Bella interjected, apparently having caught fragments of the adult conversation. They take care of each other. Is that so? Margaret looked between Elliot and Bella with calculating eyes. Elliot said elephant families never forget each other, Bella continued, and they love each other very much even when they have to walk far apart sometimes. The statement hung in the air, innocent but loaded with meaning. Out of the mouths of babes, Elliot thought, watching as Margaret's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Well, Margaret said after a moment, I suppose knowing about elephant families is a start. The rest of lunch passed with easier conversation. Margaret asked pointed but less hostile questions about his living arrangements, his financial stability, and his understanding of child development. Elliot answered honestly, admitting when he didn't know something and demonstrating that he'd been doing research about age-appropriate activities and parenting strategies. Can Elliot read me a story after lunch? Bella asked as Margaret cleared the plates. If it's okay with your mama, Elliot said carefully. Naomi, who had been mostly quiet during the interrogation, nodded. One story, then quiet time. They settled in the living room. Bella curled against Elliot's side with the elephant book on his lap. As he read about the baby elephant learning to paint, Bella provided commentary and asked questions that revealed both her curiosity and her intelligence. Why does the baby elephant need to practice, she asked. Because learning new things takes time, Elliot explained. Even elephants have to practice to get good at something. Like how I practice writing my letters? Exactly like that. When the story ended, Bella yawned and rubbed her eyes. Will you read to me again sometime? If your mama says it's okay, I'd love to. As Naomi took Bella upstairs for her nap, Margaret settled into the chair across from Elliot, with the air of someone preparing for a final examination. My daughter loved you once, she said without preamble. Really loved you, in the way that changes a person permanently. Elliot nodded, not trusting himself to speak. When she came home pregnant and heartbroken, I wanted to hire someone to make you disappear permanently. Margaret's smile was sharp, but not entirely unfriendly. But Naomi wouldn't even let me call you names in front of Bella. Said children shouldn't learn that anger was the answer to disappointment. She's remarkable. Yes, she is. And so is that little girl upstairs who just spent 2 hours falling in love with the idea of having a father. Margaret leaned forward. So let me be very clear, Mr. Vance. If you break her heart the way you broke her mother's, you'll answer to me. And at my age, I have very little left to lose. I understand. Do you? Because Bella isn't just accepting you, she's already bonding with you. Children her age don't have defense mechanisms. When they love completely and without reservation. Margaret's voice softened slightly. If you leave again, it won't just hurt her. It will teach her that men who claim to care about her will eventually abandon her. The weight of that responsibility settled on Elliot's shoulders like lead. What can I do to prove I won't leave? Time, Margaret said simply. Consistency, putting her needs before your own. Every single time. She stood, smoothing her skirt, and understanding that being part of this family means all of us, not just the parts that are convenient for you. As Elliot prepared to leave, Naomi walked him to the door while Margaret stayed with the napping Bella. Your mother is formidable, he said. She's protective, and she likes you more than she's letting on. or you'd already be face down in the front yard. That's reassuring. Elliot paused at the threshold. Naomi, what Bella said about elephant families, did she come up with that on her own? Children see things more clearly than adults sometimes, Naomi said carefully. They understand love without all the complications we attach to it. And what do you see? I see a man trying very hard to become someone worthy of his daughter's trust. She met his eyes. The question is whether you can sustain that effort when it stops being new and starts being routine. As Elliot walked to his car, he could feel two pairs of eyes watching him from the front window. Margaret's suspicious but slightly less hostile, and Naomi's cautiously hopeful. For the first time since this all began, he felt like he might actually belong somewhere. But he also understood that belonging was something he'd have to earn every single day. 2 months later, Elliot was learning that fatherhood was nothing like the business world had prepared him for. You couldn't negotiate with a toddler who decided her socks were wrong, couldn't schedule around a child's emotional meltdowns, and definitely couldn't strategize your way out of the pure exhaustion that came from trying to match Bella's boundless energy. He was also learning that he'd never been happier in his life. His Tuesday coffee meetings with Naomi had expanded to Saturday afternoon visits, then Sunday morning breakfasts, and occasionally Wednesday evening dinners when Naomi had to work late at the hospital. Bella had declared him the best story reader ever and had taken to calling him my Elliot, with the possessive pride of a child who'd claimed something precious. The breakthrough had come 3 weeks earlier, during what Bella had called the great sock crisis of Tuesday morning. She'd refused to wear anything but her elephant socks, which were in the wash, and had worked herself into the kind of sobbing meltdown that left Naomi frazzled and running late for work. Elliot had been there for their weekly coffee, witnessed the chaos, and without thinking had suggested they go buy new elephant socks right then and there. Bella had looked at him with wonder, as if he'd just solved the world's most complex problem. We can buy socks whenever we want? She'd asked, eyes wide. Well, within reason, Naomi had said, shooting Elliot a grateful look. That shopping trip, 30 minutes in Target's children's section that felt more important than any board meeting he'd ever attended, had marked a shift. Bella began asking for my Elliot specifically when she needed help with puzzles, wanted someone to push her on the swings, or had important questions about whether clouds had feelings. Now, standing in the toy aisle of the same Target, Elliot was helping Bella choose a birthday present for her friend Sophie when his phone rang. The caller ID made his blood run cold. Massachusetts General Hospital. Mr. Vance? This is Dr. Rodriguez from MGH Emergency. I'm calling about Naomi Keller. You're listed as her emergency contact. The world tilted sideways. What happened? She was in a car accident about an hour ago. She's stable, but she has a concussion and some broken ribs. She's asking for you. Elliot's mind went blank, then shifted into crisis management mode. I'll be right there. What about Bella? Is she... The child wasn't with her. Ms. Keller was coming home from work when another driver ran a red light. Relief and terror warred in his chest. Bella was safe with Margaret, but Naomi was hurt, and he was suddenly the emergency contact, the person she'd trusted with this responsibility. Bella, he said, crouching down to her level in the toy aisle. We need to go see Mama. She had an accident, but she's okay. Bella's face crumpled with the instant fear that children felt when they sensed adult panic. Is Mama hurt? A little bit hurt, but the doctors are taking very good care of her. Elliot forced his voice to remain calm. We need to go to the hospital so we can give her hugs and tell her we love her. The drive to MGH was the longest 20 minutes of Elliot's life. Bella sat in her car seat. He'd bought one for his car 6 weeks ago just in case, clutching little Gray and firing questions with the relentless logic of a frightened child. Why did someone crash into Mama? Sometimes accidents happen, even when people are being careful. Will the doctors make her not hurt? They're going to help her feel better. Can we bring her soup? Gamma's soup makes everything better. That's a wonderful idea. We'll ask Gamma to make soup. At the hospital, Bella's hand gripped his tightly as they navigated the maze of corridors. The emergency department was exactly as overwhelming as Elliot remembered from his father's heart attacks. Too bright, too busy, filled with the controlled chaos of people managing other people's worst days. They found Naomi in bed 14, looking smaller and more fragile than Elliot had ever seen her. Her left arm was in a sling. Bruises were already darkening across her collarbone, and there was a butterfly bandage over a cut on her forehead, but her eyes were clear and alert when she saw them. Mama! Bella tried to run to the bed, but Elliot caught her gently. Careful, sweetheart. Mama's hurt, so we need to be very gentle. Naomi's eyes filled with tears as Bella approached slowly. Little Gray clutched against her chest. "Hi, baby girl. Are you okay?" "I'm not hurt," Bella said solemnly. "But you are hurt. Why are you hurt?" "Sometimes cars bump into each other by accident," Naomi explained, her voice slightly hoarse. "It's nobody's fault, just one of those things that happens sometimes." Bella studied her mother's bruises with the intense focus she usually reserved for art projects. "Do they hurt very much?" "A little, but seeing you makes me feel so much better." Elliot remained by the foot of the bed, overwhelmed by the complexity of his emotions. Relief that Naomi was alive and conscious, terror at how easily he could have lost her, and a growing realization of how completely his world had reorganized itself around these two people. "The doctor said you have a concussion," he said quietly. "How do you feel?" "Like I was hit by a truck," which technically, I was. Naomi's attempt at humor fell flat when she saw the expression on his face. "Elliot, I'm okay. Really. You called me." The words came out more vulnerable than he'd intended. "I'm your emergency contact. I changed it last month after the sock crisis." Naomi's smile was tired but genuine. "I realized that if something happened to me, you were the person I'd want taking care of Bella." The significance of that trust hit him like lightning. Not Margaret, not Naomi's colleagues at work, but him. The man who'd abandoned them once was now the person she'd trust with their daughter's welfare. "Mama," Bella said, climbing carefully onto the bed with Elliot's help. "Elliot drove very fast to come see you, but not too fast because that's dangerous." "He did? And he didn't cry even though he looked like he wanted to." Bella continued with the brutal honesty of childhood. "And he said we can bring you Gamma's soup to make you better." "Your Elliot sounds very smart," Naomi said, meeting his eyes over Bella's head. "He is smart, and he knows about elephant families." Bella settled against Naomi's good side, careful not to jostle her injuries. "Elliot, tell Mama about elephant families." "I think your mama knows about elephant families," Elliot said, pulling a chair close to the bed. "But tell her anyway. It's important." Elliot looked at Naomi, who nodded encouragingly despite her obvious exhaustion. "Elephant families take care of each other," he said, his voice catching slightly. "When one elephant is hurt, the others surround her and protect her until she's strong again." "That's right," Bella said with satisfaction. "And they never leave each other behind." "Never," Elliot agreed, his eyes locked on Naomi's. Dr. Rodriguez appeared in the doorway, a kind-faced woman in her 40s who smiled at the family tableau. "Ms. Keller, I have your discharge papers. You can go home, but you'll need someone to stay with you for the next 24 hours. Concussion protocol." "I can stay," Elliot said immediately. "Actually," Naomi said carefully, "would it be possible for us to stay at your apartment? My place has stairs, and with the broken ribs." It was the first time she'd suggested spending the night at his place, the first time she'd voluntarily put herself in the position of needing his care. Elliot felt something shift in his chest, like a piece of his heart clicking into place. "Of course, whatever you need." An hour later, they were settled in his Porter Square apartment. Bella was delighted by this unexpected adventure, exploring his kitchen while he heated up soup Margaret had insisted on sending over. Naomi was propped up on his couch, looking pale but determined to stay awake. "This is a nice place," she said, looking around at the carefully chosen furniture, the children's books he'd started collecting, the framed photo of Bella that sat on his coffee table. "It's starting to feel like home," Elliot replied, watching Bella examine his refrigerator with scientific interest. "Elliot," Naomi said quietly, "can we talk? About something important?" He joined her on the couch, careful not to jostle her injured side. "What is it?" "When I woke up in the ambulance, the first thing I thought wasn't about my injuries or the accident." She turned to face him fully. "It was about Bella, about what would happen to her if I didn't make it." Elliot's throat tightened. "Naomi, let me finish. I've been thinking about this for weeks, especially after watching you with her these past 2 months. You're not the same man who left 3 years ago. I hope not. You're not. And I need to tell you something I probably should have said sooner." Naomi took a shaky breath. "I'm not just letting you into Bella's life anymore. I want you in her life. Permanently. Officially." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to talk about custody arrangements, about you being her father in every way that matters." Naomi's eyes filled with tears. "I'm saying that today, when I thought I might not come home to her, I realized that she needs you, not just as a visitor or a friend, but as her dad." Bella chose that moment to return from her kitchen exploration, carrying little Gray and looking serious. "Mama, why are you crying? Are your hurts worse?" "No, baby," Naomi said, wiping her eyes. "These are happy tears." "Why are you happy crying?" Naomi looked at Elliot, then back at Bella. "Because our elephant family is getting stronger." Bella considered this gravely, then climbed onto the couch between them. "Good. Elephant families should be strong." As Elliot watched his daughter settle contentedly between him and Naomi, her small hand reaching for his, he realized that sometimes the most important moments happened quietly, in apartments that smelled like soup and safety, with children who understood love better than the adults who tried so hard to complicate it. He was finally, truly, exactly where he belonged. 1 year later, Elliot stood in the kitchen of the house they'd bought together in Arlington, a modest colonial with a big backyard, a tire swing, and enough bedrooms for the life they were building, watching Bella attempt to crack eggs for their Saturday morning pancakes. Her tongue was stuck out in concentration, and she had flour in her dark curls, but she insisted on being the head chef for their weekly family breakfast. "Careful, sweetheart," he said, steadying her hands as she worked. "Remember what we practiced." "I know, Daddy. Crack on the edge, not too hard." The word still sent a thrill through him every time she said it. 6 months ago, after the custody papers were finalized and the legal adoption was complete, Bella had simply announced at dinner that she was ready to call him Daddy instead of Elliot. "Because that's what you are," she'd said with the matter-of-fact logic that made her impossible to argue with. Now, at 3.5, she ruled their household with the benevolent dictatorship unique to beloved children. She'd informed them that they needed a dog, for security, that vegetables should be shaped like animals, for nutrition, and that bedtime stories weren't optional, for education. "Where's Mama?" Bella asked, successfully cracking her third egg. "She's getting dressed. We have something special to tell you today." "Is it about the surprise you and Mama keep whispering about?" Elliot grinned. Bella was too observant for her own good, picking up on the excited energy that had been crackling between him and Naomi for the past week since they'd gotten the call from the adoption agency. "Maybe. But first, pancakes." They'd just finished cooking when Naomi appeared in the doorway, still moving carefully. The accident had left her with occasional back pain that flared up in cold weather, but her smile was radiant as she took in the scene. Bella wearing her elephant apron and standing on a step stool, Elliot with flower handprints on his jeans, and the kitchen looking like a disaster zone. "My 2 favorite chefs," she said, kissing Bella's forehead before accepting the coffee Elliot handed her. "How did we do this morning?" "Bella cracked all the eggs herself," Elliot reported proudly, "and she only got a little bit of shell in the bowl." "I'm getting better," Bella announced. "Practice makes perfect, right, Daddy?" "Right. Just like everything else worth learning." They ate breakfast on the back porch, despite the October chill, because Bella had declared it was too beautiful a day to eat inside. The maple trees in their yard were showing off in shades of red and gold, and Bella kept pointing out different colored leaves with the enthusiasm of someone discovering fire. "Bella," Naomi said when they'd finished eating, "Daddy and I have something exciting to tell you." Bella immediately sat up straighter, her dark eyes, Elliot's eyes, bright with curiosity. "Is it about the dog?" "Not about the dog," Elliot said, exchanging a look with Naomi. They'd rehearsed this conversation, but suddenly it felt monumentally important to get it right. "You know how families can grow in different ways?" Naomi began. "Sometimes families start with a mommy and daddy, and sometimes they start with just a mommy, and sometimes people become families by choosing each other. Like us," Bella said solemnly. "We chose to be a family. Exactly like us. And sometimes families grow when a new baby comes to live with them." Bella's eyes went wide. "A baby? A real baby?" "A real baby," Naomi confirmed. "There's a little girl who needs a family, and we were chosen to be her mommy and daddy and big sister." "Is she in your tummy?" Bella asked, pressing her hand against Naomi's stomach with scientific interest. "No, sweetheart. She's 2 months old, and she's been living with foster parents who've been taking very good care of her, but now she's ready to come home to her forever family." Elliot watched Bella process this information with the careful consideration she brought to all important matters. "Will she like elephants?" "I don't know," Naomi said seriously. "What do you think we should do if she doesn't?" "We'll teach her, but not if she doesn't want to learn. Everyone gets to like different things." Bella paused, then asked the question Elliot had been dreading. "Why doesn't she have a family already?" Naomi took a breath. They'd agreed to be honest but age-appropriate. Her first mommy loved her very much, but she wasn't able to take care of a baby. So she made the very brave choice to find her daughter a family who could give her everything she needs. That's very brave, Bella agreed. When do we meet her? Next week. We'll visit her a few times and then, if everyone agrees, she'll come home with us. Bella was quiet for a moment, swinging her legs from her chair. Will I be a good big sister? You'll be the best big sister, Elliot said, his voice thick with emotion. You're kind and smart and careful with little things. You'll teach her about elephant families and how to make pancakes and why bedtime stories are important. And I'll share my room? Actually, Naomi said, we thought you might like your own room, and the baby could have the room next to ours. But you could visit whenever you wanted. Good. Big sisters need privacy sometimes, but also visiting. Bella climbed down from her chair and hugged both of them simultaneously. I'm ready to meet my sister now. That afternoon, while Bella napped, Elliot and Naomi sat on their front porch swing, sharing the quiet contentment that came with having survived the morning's revelation better than they dared hope. She's going to be amazing with the baby, Naomi said, curled against Elliot's side. She's amazing with everything. Wonder where she gets that from. Definitely not from the man who used to think scheduling was more important than spontaneity. Elliot laughed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. That man was an idiot. He wasn't an idiot. He was just afraid of wanting things he thought he couldn't have. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their neighbors walk dogs and rake leaves, participating in the ordinary magic of suburban Saturday afternoons. 2 years ago, Elliot couldn't have imagined this life, so different from the penthouse views and strategic partnerships that had once defined success for him. Now he couldn't imagine anything else. Are you nervous? Naomi asked. About the baby? Terrified, Elliot admitted. What if I'm not good at the newborn stage? What if I don't know how to comfort her when she cries? Then you'll learn. The same way you learned that Bella needs her elephant socks and that bedtime stories require different voices for different characters, and that sometimes the best response to a toddler meltdown is distraction rather than logic. You make it sound so simple. It is simple. It's not easy, but it's simple. Naomi shifted to look at him directly. You love them. You show up. You try your best. Everything else you figure out as you go. Elliot thought about the man he'd been 3 years ago. Obsessed with control, terrified of making the wrong choice, paralyzed by the gap between what he wanted and what he thought he was supposed to want. I have something to tell you, he said suddenly. Naomi raised an eyebrow. More surprises? Camille called yesterday. She and Alexandra are getting married next month. That's wonderful. Are you invited? We're all invited. She specifically asked to meet Bella. Elliot smiled. Apparently she wants to thank the little girl who helped her realize what real love looks like. And what does real love look like? This, Elliot said simply, gesturing toward their house, their life, the sound of their daughter playing in her room upstairs. Choosing to build something together instead of just maintaining what already exists. Risking everything you think you're supposed to want for the chance at what you actually need. Even when it's scary? Especially when it's scary. The front door burst open and Bella appeared with little Gray tucked under one arm and a book in the other hand. Story time. And I want to sit in the middle. As they settled on the porch swing, Bella between them, little Gray in her lap, the afternoon sun warming their faces, Elliot opened the book and began to read. It was a new story, about a family of different animals who found each other and decided to stay together forever. And Bella listened with the focused attention she gave to all tales about families choosing each other. Read it again, she demanded when he finished. Again? Please. I want to make sure I understand it for when I tell it to my baby sister. So Elliot read it again, and then once more, while Naomi dozed against his shoulder, and Bella memorized every detail. Around them, their neighborhood settled into evening, porch lights coming on, families calling children in for dinner, the soft sounds of lives being lived quietly and well. This was what he'd been searching for his whole life without knowing it. Not the grand gesture or the perfect plan, but the ordinary miracle of Saturday afternoons and shared stories, and a little girl who wanted to understand love well enough to teach it to someone else. As the sun set behind their maple trees, Elliot realized that some journeys didn't end with dramatic revelations or grand gestures. Sometimes they ended exactly where they were supposed to, at home, with the people who'd chosen to build a life together, reading the same story over and over until love felt as natural and necessary as breathing. And sometimes, that was the most extraordinary ending of all. 5 years later, the elephant costume was slightly too big, but Bella insisted it was perfect because elephants are supposed to be big. At 8 years old, she'd outgrown many things: training wheels, afternoon naps, and the need for constant reassurance. But her love for elephants remained steadfast. Today, she was performing in her school's animal parade, and her 4-year-old sister Lucy was her enthusiastic audience. "Tell me again why elephants are the best," Lucy demanded from her perch on Elliot's shoulders as they walked across the elementary school parking lot. "Because they're smart and they remember everything and they love their families," Bella recited, adjusting her gray fabric ears. "And because they help each other when someone needs help." Lucy nodded sagely, her red curls bouncing. Where Bella was serious and thoughtful, Lucy was pure energy and mischief, with Naomi's golden eyes and a laugh that could light up entire rooms. The adoption had been finalized when she was 6 months old, and she'd never known a world where Elliot wasn't daddy, and Bella wasn't her big sister. "And elephants never forget?" Lucy pressed. "Never," Bella confirmed. "That's why Daddy says we're an elephant family." Elliot exchanged a smile with Naomi, who was carrying Lucy's backpack and trying to wrangle a thermos of coffee while managing their tickets for the performance. At 39, she looked exactly the same to him: beautiful, composed, slightly frazzled in the way that mothers of 2 active children always were, but there was a contentment in her face that hadn't been there in those early, careful days when they were still learning to trust each other. "Speaking of elephant families," Naomi said, checking her phone, "your mother texted that she'll meet us at the auditorium. She's bringing enough snacks for the entire 2nd grade." Margaret had embraced her role as grandmother with the same fierce devotion she'd once applied to protecting Naomi and Bella. She'd been the one to insist on formal adoption papers, the one who'd helped them navigate the bureaucracy of international adoption for Lucy, and the one who spoiled both girls with the shameless enthusiasm of someone who'd waited 75 years to be called Gamma. The school auditorium was packed with families, the air buzzing with the excited chaos that preceded any elementary school performance. They found seats in the 3rd row, Lucy immediately claiming the best view by standing on Elliot's lap. "There's Bella!" Lucy shouted, pointing toward the stage where the 2nd grade was assembling in their various animal costumes. Bella waved back, her elephant trunk swinging with the movement, and Elliot felt the familiar tug of pride mixed with amazement. How had he gotten so lucky? How had he gone from a man who scheduled everything to someone who measured time in school performances and bedtime stories, and the small daily miracles of watching his children discover the world? The performance was exactly what you'd expect from 8-year-olds pretending to be animals: chaotic, adorable, and completely sincere. Bella delivered her lines about elephant families with the gravity of someone presenting a doctoral thesis, while her classmates giggled and forgot their cues and charmed their parents into complete adoration. "She's so serious," Naomi whispered, videotaping on her phone. "She gets that from you," Elliot whispered back. "The perfectionism is definitely from you." Fair point. After the performance, they gathered outside for the traditional post-show celebration of juice boxes and cookies. Bella was immediately surrounded by friends wanting to touch her costume, while Lucy appointed herself as the elephant expert, explaining to anyone who would listen about elephant families and their superior memory skills. "She's going to be a teacher," Margaret observed, watching Lucy hold court with a group of kindergartners. "Mark my words, that child loves being the center of attention and educating people. Wonder where she gets that," Elliot said, earning a light swat from Margaret. "From her grandmother, obviously. The good parts, anyway." As they packed up to leave, Bella ran over with her costume slightly askew and her face flushed with excitement. "Did you see me remember all my lines?" "Every single one," Naomi confirmed. "We're so proud of you." "And did you hear me tell everyone about elephant families?" "We did. You were perfect." Bella beamed, then grew serious. "Daddy, do you remember when you first told me about elephant families? At the museum, when you were 3, and you said they never leave each other behind." "That's right. Are you glad we're an elephant family?" The question was innocent, but Elliot heard the deeper meaning underneath. Even at 8, Bella sometimes needed reassurance that the family they'd built was permanent, unshakable, proof against all the uncertainties that had shaped her earliest years. "I'm more than glad," he said, crouching down to meet her eyes. "Being part of this elephant family is the best thing that ever happened to me. Better than being rich? So much better than being rich. Better than living in a fancy apartment? Better than anything I used to think I wanted." Lucy had wandered over during this conversation, and now she wrapped her arms around both Elliot and Bella in a spontaneous group hug. "I love our elephant family. she announced. Can we get ice cream to celebrate? That evening, after ice cream and baths and the elaborate bedtime ritual that involved reading to both girls in Bella's room, Elliot and Naomi sat on their back porch watching the sunset paint their maple trees in shades of gold and amber. Good day, Naomi said, curled against his side on the porch swing they'd installed the year they bought the house. The best kind of day. Remember when you used to think good days were measured by stock prices and board approvals? That wasn't me. That was some other guy who happened to share my name. Naomi laughed softly. Do you ever miss it? The corporate world, the power, the feeling of controlling billion-dollar deals? Elliot considered the question seriously. I miss the adrenaline sometimes, the sense that every decision mattered enormously. But then Lucy brings me a picture she drew or Bella explains something she learned at school, and I realize that those decisions do matter enormously. They're just different decisions, like whether to read one more story at bedtime, like whether to say yes when an 8-year-old asks if we can plant a vegetable garden because she wants to grow her own carrots. We're really going to let her do that? We're really going to let her do that. And when the rabbits eat all her carrots, we're going to comfort her and help her figure out rabbit-proof fencing for next year. And when Lucy decides she wants to help and accidentally pulls up all the carrot seedlings, we're going to take deep breaths and remember that the point isn't perfect carrots. The point is spending time together and teaching them that they can make things grow. Through the open windows behind them, they could hear the girls talking in Bella's room, their voices carrying the sleepy contentment of children who felt completely safe in their world. Bella, are you awake? Uh-huh. Lucy, do you think Mommy and Daddy are happy? I think they're happy because we're their kids, and because they chose each other, and because elephant families always take care of each other. Good. I want them to stay happy forever. They will. Daddy promises he'll never leave, and Daddy always keeps his promises. How do you know? Because he came back when he found out about me, and he stayed even when I had tantrums, and he learned how to make pancakes shaped like elephants just because I asked. Elliot felt his throat tighten with emotion. Out of the mouths of babes, Bella understood something that had taken him years to learn. Love wasn't about grand gestures or perfect timing. It was about showing up, learning to make elephant-shaped pancakes and keeping promises even when they were hard. Naomi, he said quietly. When you were raising Bella alone in those first years, did you ever imagine this? All of us together, the girls talking about whether we're happy, Sunday morning pancakes and school performances? Honestly, no. I imagined survival, getting through each day, making sure she felt loved and secure, hoping I was enough. Naomi turned to look at him in the fading light. I never let myself imagine that you might come back and actually stay. That seemed too risky to hope for. But if you could go back, knowing what you know now, would you have called me when you found out you were pregnant? It was a question they'd never fully explored. Too dangerous in those early days when trust was still fragile. I don't know, Naomi said honestly. The man you were then, I'm not sure he was ready to be the father Bella needed. Maybe everything had to happen exactly the way it did. Maybe you had to raise her alone for those first years so she'd know her own strength. And maybe you had to lose everything you thought you wanted so you could figure out what you actually needed. Do you think she's better off because of how it happened? I think she's better off because she has parents who chose to be here, rather than parents who felt trapped by obligation. Naomi smiled. And I think Lucy's better off because she was born into a family that already knew how to love on purpose. The girls had gone quiet upstairs, finally surrendering to sleep. In a few hours, there would be Sunday morning pancakes and the chaos of getting everyone ready for Lucy's soccer game. There would be grocery shopping and laundry, and the 1,000 small tasks that made up the architecture of family life. There would also be moments like this, quiet conversations on the porch swing, the satisfaction of a day well lived, the deep contentment that came from being exactly where you belonged. Elliot, yeah, I'm proud of you, for the man you became, for the father you are, for choosing this life every single day. Even when I burn the pancakes? Especially when you burn the pancakes and make jokes about it instead of getting frustrated. As they sat in the gathering darkness watching their neighborhood settle into evening, Elliot thought about the journey that had brought them here, the abandoned love, the years of separation, the tentative rebuilding of trust, and finally this, a life so different from anything he'd ever planned but somehow exactly what his heart had been searching for all along. He thought about the man he'd been at the airport 5 years ago, torn between duty and desire, choosing the safe path over the authentic one. That man couldn't have imagined elephant costumes and bedtime stories, and the fierce joy of watching your daughter remember every line in the school play. That man had been living someone else's life. This man, husband, father, maker of imperfect pancakes and keeper of promises, was finally living his own. And he wouldn't trade a single moment of it for all the corporate success in the world. Sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about finding the perfect person. They're about becoming the right person for the love you've been given. If you had to choose between a life that looked perfect on paper and a life that felt perfect in your heart, which would you choose? Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.